Back in the day, when a new iPhone was announced, we saw game-changing features that would merit upgrading to the latest and greatest iPhone, besides marginally better camera and performance improvements like today. When the iPhone 4 came out, it was all about that new retina display and the new glass and metal premium body. When the iPhone 4S came out, it was all about Siri. When the iPhone 5S came out, it was all about Touch ID. When the new iPhone 6 came out, it was all about the new larger displays. And when the iPhone 7 Plus came out, it was all about the new dual camera setup. But now that we have the iPhone 8 and 8 Plus, the iPhone 10, the iPhone XS and XS Max, and the iPhone XR, more and more people are still holding on to their older iPhone 6, 6S, and 7 just because they don't see a real need to upgrade. And until recently, I was in the same boat. Now, this video isn't going to focus on benchmarks and tell you how the iPhone XS Max is only marginally faster than last year's iPhone X. This video is going to be about my experience and gripes upgrading from my iPhone 6s Plus to my iPhone XS Max, and hopefully answer the question that is, should I drop over $1,000 to get that new iPhone? Now, I'm not going to deny that the iPhone X was a pretty big leap forward from all of the other iPhones that came before it. It finally got rid of the terribly dated forehead and chin design and gave us a nearly bezel-less design with an 83% screen-to-body ratio. But hate or to love it, the iPhone X also introduced the masses to the notch display, which unfortunately is here to stay for the foreseeable future. The iPhone X also featured Apple's new Face ID for the first time and also had other notable features, like having both of its rear camera sensors optically stabilized and wireless charging. And even though I was impressed by the iPhone X when I first saw it, my first thought was, where's the iPhone X Plus? As someone who's gotten so used to using a Plus device, you never want to go back, and that seems to be the general consensus among other Plus device users. And it could help explain why the iPhone XS Max is dramatically outselling the iPhone XS. Now, even though the iPhone XS Max has the same footprint as the iPhone 6s Plus, due to the removal of the home button and bezel-less design, there is an adjustment period. For the first week and a half, I naturally reached for the non-existent home button, and I did consider swapping my XS Max for a standard XS. But now that I've adjusted, I found that the new gesture-based navigation on the iPhone X and so on is much more fluid than using the home button. You just flick apps away and you swipe through them, sort of like Tom Cruise in Minority Report. But the removal of the home button does bring a major handicap for Plus device users. Before, if you touch the home button twice, iOS would bring down the top half of your screen, so single-handed use of your iPhone whatever Plus was much more manageable. Now, the iPhone XS Max still has this reachability feature buried in its accessibility settings, but it's not as foolproof as it used to be. Since you have to swipe down on the bottom edge of the screen, it feels very unnatural, and you do risk dropping your phone because of how you have to hold it. And since you navigate through this phone by swiping up and down, it means sometimes the screen doesn't drop down on the first try, or you accidentally end up closing an app or pulling down the Siri suggestion tab. And overall, the iPhone XS Max is a much more two-handed device than previous Plus devices because of the removal of the home button and gesture-based navigation. The new bezel-less design that most flagship devices are aiming for these days also brings its own sets of handicaps on the new iPhone XS Max. With the screen turned off, it's very hard to tell which way is up or down on the XS Max. Android devices combat this by having an optional always-on display, and with older Plus devices, you can easily tell which way is up or down because of that home button. But the first 2 weeks I tried using the iPhone XS Max without a case, I was picking this phone up upside down on a regular basis. And in general, the iPhone XS Max just isn't designed to be used without a case, period. Due to its all-glass back, this iPhone is going to slide around any table or surface that isn't perfectly leveled and is going to slide out of your pocket on a regular basis when you're sitting in the car. But the biggest thing that irks me about these new iPhones is the camera hump. I remember when the iPhone 6 debuted the camera hump, and everyone said that this design choice was very un-Apple-like and that Steve Jobs wouldn't have allowed this if he was still alive. But fast forward to now, the camera hump on the XS Max is 3 times as tall as the 6S. Now, I don't mind how this camera hump looks, but I do mind how if you place this phone on the table, it's constantly going to rock back and forth. And I just feel Apple should reel the camera hump back a bit, because Google proves that you can take some great quality pictures with just not a single lens, but also a lens that doesn't stick out so much. So putting a case on your iPhone these days isn't just about protection anymore. You need a case where you have some asymmetry on the front so you know which way is up or down. You need something that's going to offer more friction than glass whenever you place this down somewhere so it's not constantly flying all over the place. And you need it to compensate for the camera hump on the back, or else you risk scratching your telephoto lens. Honestly, I think a skin on the iPhone XS Max just isn't going to cut it. I tried. Now, besides a more premium finish, phones these days have a glass back so that they can have wireless charging. Now, personally, I don't really care for wireless charging because you can't use your phone and charge your phone at the same time. But wireless charging in general can be pretty useful if you have a newer car that has a wireless charging pad built in directly into the center console. But still, if you want to use Apple CarPlay, or if you want to listen to your music in higher quality that isn't Bluetooth, you're still going to have to connect the XS Max through the Lightning connector anyways. And just like before, the iPhone XS Max comes included with the same 5-watt power adapter and charging cable that's been standard since the iPhone 5. Now, this phone has had no problem lasting me through a full day of heavy usage of scrolling through the internet and watching YouTube videos. But even after you spend over $1,000 on your new phone, Apple still expects you to fork over at least another $70 for a 30-watt power adapter and USB-C cable if you want fast charging. Something that, mind you, comes standard with a lot of other flagship devices now. I just think this is ridiculous. I also think it's ridiculous how the iPhone XS Max does a very poor job of clearly and directly telling you its current battery percentage, perhaps the most important stat you need to know about your phone at any given time. Unless you pull the Control Center tab down, the XS Max won't tell you its exact battery percentage like older iPhones that don't have a notch. I just feel Apple needs to shuffle or get rid of some of these icons so we can get actual numbers. But I also hate how much harder it is to open Control Center on the XS Max compared to older iPhones, because again, it's forcing you to use both hands for something that used to be much easier before. Now, when it comes to Face ID and the notch, I don't hate it, but I don't love it. Regarding the notch, you learn to live with it, and since the majority of the time you're looking at the center of the screen, because that's where your content usually is, you forget it's there. And since Face ID is slightly faster on the iPhone XS and XS Max compared to the iPhone X, it's almost instantaneous. But I will admit Face ID is kind of like Wi-Fi. When it works, great, it works, and you don't think about it. But when it starts acting up, that's when you start thinking there has to be a better way. And yes, Touch ID is still slightly faster than Face ID, and I sometimes miss Touch ID because it's a more passive way to unlock your phone. With Touch ID, you just press the home button and you're in. Whereas with Face ID, you have to take that extra second to at least be facing the screen. And finally, when it comes to the removal of the headphone jack, it's really only going to affect people who are coming from an iPhone 6s and older. And since I use AirPods, Powerbeats, and other wireless headphones on a regular basis, I honestly can't remember the last time I actually needed to use a headphone jack on my phone. And I feel that the majority of people these days aren't really going to miss a headphone jack at all. And even though the XS Max doesn't come included with a dongle, again, I think the majority of people aren't going to miss it. Honestly, if I didn't need to hook up a mic to my XS Max when I live stream with it, then I would have no need for a headphone jack or dongle at all. So those are some of the major gripes that I've had and wanted to point out about upgrading from my iPhone 6s Plus to the iPhone XS Max. But still, there are some benefits to upgrading to the iPhone XS Max even over the iPhone 8 Plus. Mainly, that OLED screen. The colors are much more vibrant, the screen is much brighter, and the color contrast is on a whole other level the LCD panel on the iPhone 8 Plus and iPhone XR just can't come close to. And if you consume the majority of your content on your phone, then you're really going to enjoy that screen. Upgrading to the iPhone XS Max also means you're going to have much more processing power built in and RAM, so you're going to be able to navigate through your phone, open web pages, and switch between apps much smoother. But you're really only going to notice this performance upgrade if you're coming from an iPhone 7 or later. Now, I did see a huge performance improvement in my iPhone 6s Plus when I got a new battery and updated to iOS 12. So good in fact, I briefly considered canceling my iPhone XS Max pre-order. But since the iPhone 6s 6s Plus just doesn't have as much processing power and RAM built in, the phone does still occasionally stutter and apps don't stay active in the background, so when you switch back to them, you have to wait a few seconds for them to pick up where you left off. So having that amazing OLED panel with deep blacks and sheer processing power, at least for me, has justified upgrading to the iPhone XS Max. And personally, I can make do without an all-glass and stainless steel body and wireless charging. If there was a cheaper iPhone with the same screen, guts, and cameras as the iPhone XS Max, but in a metal body, I'd be all over that. And finally, let's talk about the cameras on the iPhone XS Max. Just as you'd expect, this is the best camera on an iPhone ever. And when the next iPhone comes out, that iPhone is going to have the best camera on an iPhone ever. But in general, the camera on the iPhone XS Max does take some amazing pictures and video. So good in fact that I've started using the XS Max for B-roll in some of my other videos. And having that telephoto lens means being able to get very crispy up-close shots without having to use digital zoom. And having portrait mode on both the rear and front-facing cameras is very nice as well. But even though portrait mode on the iPhone has gotten progressively better, there's still a little room for improvement. Sometimes the edge detection does have a little trouble when it comes to hair on both people and pets, but this is something that can be fixed through software. But overall, I'm pretty indifferent with my iPhone XS Max now that I finally caved and put a case on it. A case isn't just about protecting your phone anymore. You need it to compensate for this quote-unquote premium design. You need it for the asymmetry on the front, you need something that's going to offer more friction and grip than glass, and you need it to protect the protruding camera hump on the back. Flagship phones these days just aren't designed to be used without a case. You just take them out of the box, admire them for a few minutes, and then shove them into a case never to be taken back out again. But since I'm upgrading from the iPhone 6s Plus all the way to the iPhone XS Max, the OLED screen, performance improvement, and longer battery life are what have justified this major purchase for me. But it doesn't justify a total of $1,200 for me. If you're still rocking an iPhone 7 or iPhone 8, there's absolutely no need to upgrade. And if you do have an older iPhone like I did, then I feel upgrading to the iPhone 8 Plus is still a very serious option to consider right now. The iPhone XS Max just doesn't bring anything too revolutionary anymore compared to previous iPhones and other phones on the market right now. And in general, phone refresh cycles are becoming more and more incremental, and phone manufacturers know this. So that's why companies like Apple, Google, and Samsung are focusing on making the best ecosystem out there. So that if you already have their phone, the likelihood of you getting their latest phone is very high when it comes to upgrading, just because you don't want to leave their ecosystem that you're already heavily invested in. And I think upgrading to the iPhone 8 Plus is still a very good option for people out there who just don't want to spend a whole bunch of money on a phone that's only slightly better. And since Apple has done a very good job of keeping their phones updated and running very smoothly, I feel it's still a good idea to stick with Apple because of longevity. Like I mentioned earlier, when I upgraded my 6s Plus to iOS 12 and got a new battery, it was working pretty well. And the lack of longevity is one of the major reasons why I'm so against getting a Samsung device. They just do a very poor job of providing timely software updates for their devices. And it looks like Google is also starting to take longevity in their devices very seriously, because they've committed to supporting the new Pixel phones for at least 3 years. So what I'm saying is, you don't have to drop over $1,200 on the new base model iPhone XS Max. Because after taxes and the case, that's about how much you're going to be spending on the low end. But if you do, you can rest assured that it's still a somewhat sound investment, because Apple will continue to support and maximize your phone for years to come. But for my Plus device users that want to save some money and don't want to settle for a smaller device like the iPhone XR, because honestly that's one of the reasons why I didn't get the iPhone X last year, then the iPhone 8 Plus is still a good option to seriously consider today. If you made it this far, I guess you enjoyed the video, so hit that like button and get subscribed. It helps out more than you realize. Support the channel by clicking on the links down below, and I'll catch you next time.